As the FBI gets pulled into the fight over Judge Brett Kavanaugh's nomination, more and more is trickling out that could be confirmed or debunked with a professional investigation into the sexual assault allegations, ones that Kavanaugh denies. So let's take a look at what surfaced without FBI agents looking into this. First of all, Professor Ford says Kavanaugh was drunk when he allegedly assaulted her at a high school party in Maryland. Kavanaugh's yearbook lists Keg City Club as one of his activities, saying 100 kegs or bust. Ford also claims that Kavanaugh's friend Mark Judge was in the room when she was allegedly assaulted. In his yearbook, Mark Judge has a reference to Alcoholics Unanimous, along with the 100 kegs or bust line. And he refers to a Bart asking if he boofed yet. According to Urban Dictionary, that's a slang term for a sex act or a sex act involving drugs. Kavanaugh's page contains the line, "Judge, have you boofed yet?" And in one of Mark Judge's books, he describes a Bart O'Kavanaugh who is referenced as vomiting in the backseat of a car and passing out after a party. Ford claims Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her, trying to undress her with Mark Judge in the room. In Kavanaugh's yearbook, there's a line about the Devil's Triangle, a slang term, according to Urban Dictionary, referencing two men engaging in a sex act with the same woman at the same time. We haven't seen other students' pages, so we don't know if these comments are representative of other comments or unique to Brett Kavanaugh and Mark Judge. In 2015, Kavanaugh reflected on a saying between his classmates at Georgetown Prep.
We had a good saying that we've held firm to this day, as the dean was reminding me before the talk, which is what happens at Georgetown Prep stays at Georgetown Prep. That's been a good thing for all of us, I think.
Now, it's up to investigators to figure out how relevant that is, but he did use a version of that line in a 2014 speech at a Federalist Society meeting. According to a transcript obtained by the Washington Post, he discussed his time that he and other law school classmates attended a Red Sox game and returned on a bus very intoxicated. Kavanaugh said, quote, "We had a motto, what happens on the bus stays on the bus." But there's one more quote Kavanaugh made that same night that doesn't quite square with these last two comments. He says, "Always act as if your actions are public."
Here's what I don't get, Allie. If anybody looked at my high school yearbook, I would totally be embarrassed. Sure, my kids, I'd be embarrassed. Big hair, pom-poms, cheesy best friends forever lines. You might be in a leisure suit with a big fro. I don't know, but I am blown away. Before I saw this stuff, I'm like, oh, come on, what could be in this guy's yearbook? Like, little nonsense. This is sick stuff.
Right.
The Devil's Triangle in your yearbook forever and ever. So you can say, I mean, what is poor Brett Kavanaugh's family going through? How humiliating. He's got this out there, and this isn't a one night. You have time to judge. This is going to go in my yearbook printed forever. Like, that's some abusive stuff.
Well,
nasty.
There's another line from Kavanaugh's speech that I think applies to this moment. He says, "You will make mistakes, sometimes big ones. Admit it. Resolve not to do it again, and make sure you don't do it again." That's interesting. So now we want to bring in NBC News investigative reporter Ken Dilanian and MSNBC contributor and former U.S. attorney and senior FBI official Chuck Rosenberg.
Chuck, I want to go to you first. A background check of Brett Kavanaugh already happened. Now we're talking about should it be reopened. The kind of stuff we're reading in his yearbook, the statements he made, why wouldn't that have been a red flag? Would that not be considered much? Or it only seems strange because now we have an accuser?
You know, Stephanie, it might have been in the background investigation that the FBI gave to the White House. We don't know that. But given all of the other things we now know, all the things that Allie outlined at the beginning of this segment, it makes perfect sense for me to the White House to ask the FBI to reopen it. And if they ask or direct them to do it, the FBI will. That's their job. They do investigations. And that's also why this is not a he said, she said situation. I think that formulation is nonsensical. No, it's not. Yeah, I'd be glad to. Because there are so many other things out there that could either corroborate or confirm what either person is saying. There are friends to talk to, there are teachers to talk to, there are parents to talk to. You could canvass social media. There's lots of things you could do to determine whether one is telling the truth and one is lying. Or if simply they don't remember. There are ways to corroborate this. This is what the FBI does. They ought to be asked to do it here.
Judiciary Committee, part of the problem here is the Judiciary Committee only plans to call 2 witnesses versus the 22 that were called during Anita Hill's hearing. What's the difference? What's the significance of that?
Well, it suggests to me, look, trials are about a search for the truth. They're not perfect, but what they attempt to do through testimony and confrontation is determine the truth. And the way you do that is by putting in lots of witnesses and lots of evidence. Senate hearings, in my view, are not a search for the truth. They are an attempt to advance a political interest. Now, that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a different thing. But if what we really want to do here is find the truth, then you would do it as exhaustively and thoroughly as is possible. Does that mean 22 witnesses? I don't know, but it certainly means more than 2, and it certainly means, Ali, that you don't start at the end. You don't start with the 2 most important witnesses. You start with other people who knew them, who might have been there, who might have heard something, and who can corroborate this or refute it.
Ken, what are people inside the FBI telling you? I don't know anything about how these exhaustive background checks work, but now when I look at Brett Kavanaugh's yearbook, it makes me scratch my head, but would it not have been an issue before? It wouldn't have raised a flag?
Well, what they're saying is that they would be happy, as Chuck said, to investigate further this allegation if only the White House would authorize them to do that. And they would be fully capable of going to talk to witnesses in private, outside the glare of the media spotlight, going to talk to, for example, this woman in Mexico City who was a schoolmate of Blasey Ford who says she remembers hearing something about this. She has no firsthand information, doesn't know whether it's true, but remembers people talking about it. That's the kind of thing. And if I could just go back to the Thomas Hill hearings, because that's the real precedent for this. And remember, that was considered a deeply flawed process. Thomas was narrowly confirmed, and there was a lot of reporting in books and elsewhere afterwards that brought out negative information about Thomas that made a lot of people think that he was actually guilty of sexual harassment, but that wasn't included in that hearing. Nonetheless, there were, as you said, 22 witnesses were called, including 3 people who testified that Hill had told them at the time about this conduct. None of that is going to happen in this case if this plan goes forward. No effort to seek corroboration either by the FBI or anyone else. And by the way, the FBI did investigate the Hill-Thomas matter. They took 3 days. They did what they could, and they filed a report to the White House. The White House determined that it was unfounded, but there's no effort being made to investigate this, and that's what I think a lot of people are concerned by, guys.
Why?
It's a good question. I mean, Chuck, if you call the FBI in to investigate a comment you've made, one has to know that lying to the FBI is a serious offense.
Yeah, Ali, that's right. And so and a lot of people have pointed it out, and I think it's an important and thoughtful comment. If I've done something wrong, if I've lied, if I have something to cover up, then probably the last group of people that I want looking at me and my conduct is the FBI, right? And so, look, this doesn't tell me, convincingly or sort of completely that Dr. Ford is telling the truth. But it is an indication that she's telling the truth, and it is a reason to ask the FBI if it can to determine this. Now, there's a problem here. This happened many years ago. That doesn't make it impossible to do so. It just makes it difficult. The FBI does difficult cases. They do them all the time. And if asked, they can do it here.
How narrow can an investigation be, though? Chuck, stay with me for a minute, because I think back to when the Robert Mueller investigation started, and people said this is going to be so treacherous for the president because there's not any real boundaries here. He could go anywhere. If Brett Kavanaugh is telling the truth, and to the best of our knowledge, there is no track record, there is no pattern, it is a one-off that's wildly out of character, what's the downside for him?
Well, I don't know that there's much downside if he's telling the truth. To your point, Stephanie, if the investigation, the reinvestigation were to go far and wide, broad and deep, and they found all sorts of other stuff, I guess my response to that is then, so be it. If by narrow you mean, can it be done quickly and efficiently, I think the answer is yes. But look, the FBI has 13,500 special agents, men and women, who are pretty good at asking questions and getting answers. You could throw a whole bunch of agents, 24 of them, at this quickly, and they can do it efficiently. And if there's nothing there, then so be it. But there doesn't seem to me to be a reason not to ask.
Guys, thanks very much for your analysis on this. Chuck Rosenberg is a former U.S. attorney and senior FBI official. Ken Delanian is our NBC News national security and intelligence reporter.
Ali, I understand why the Senate Judiciary Committee, for political reasons, is like, let's get this done midterms. But if I'm Brett Kavanaugh, my name, my reputation is everything. I might feel like, you know what, please do it. He's less concerned about the midterms. This is his life.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.